Hello there everyone. So this is an archetype that I knew that we'd get around to covering somewhere down the line. I also knew that this one was going to take a lot more effort to get right, and it's for this reason why I've actually held off from making any videos on the Anima and the Shadow, precisely because I understand the level of investment that they require in order to convey them properly. What I've tried to do thus far though with every single archetype video that I've made is to one, remain obedient to the original source material by Carl Jung, and also with each new iteration offer a new context as to how our lives are shaped by them. Because an archetype isn't just some novel concept to be amused over, it's something so essential to our lives that it substrates the direction of all our thought and action. And that's why I think that understanding them is so important, because if you consider the subject properly, and you learn with it over time, you can import that understanding back over into your own life. And that then gives you a framework that you can use to decipher the patterns of your thoughts, your actions, and the life decisions that affect you and everybody else around you. I once read a book about the biology of vision that was talking about how, contrary to the way that we might think about it, our brain doesn't automatically read into the environment in this highly detailed way. Instead, what it does is it looks out for essentials that relate back to common variables that it's experienced before, like room, door, computer, screen, human, and things like that. And those variables, or those templates, then help it to build up visual subjects in greater detail. And I think that archetypes can be seen as being very much like that. There are a set of core templates that mandate all of our action and behavior, and these essential forms, or archetypes, are what awards human life with its universal character. The book also said that the brain is always on a hunt for new information, and interestingly, the most stimulating information for the brain is information about itself. And subjects like archetypes, I think, are an excellent resource for that, because it awards the mind with this interpretive framework through which it can interpret the language of its essential patterns. Before we get started, I just want to tell you that this video is going to be part of a set. This video will address the subject as it pertains to the male Anima, and the follow-up video to this one will focus specifically on the female Animus. Because what I've noticed is that what often happens is that the Anima becomes the primary focus, and people say things like, well, everything that we say about the Anima also applies to the Animus as well, which is technically true. However, I think that these things are simply better received when they're addressed to people in their respective sex-specific context. Right then, with all that being said, let's contend with the Anima. The problems of unravelling a concept so poignant to life as this is the same in all complex subjects that correlate over many ranges of human experience. A common accusation levelled at archetypes is that they are merely fanciful inventions standing in absence of good data, or at worst, mysticism masquerading as honest psychology. But contrary to these claims, Jung emphasized that the concept of the Anima was only trying to account for a range of related psychological phenomena that had a purely empirical origin. Therefore, Anima, as applied to psychological phenomena, is akin to the category feline when we are trying to account for a range of animals that share common discernible characteristics. So what characteristics are we addressing when we invoke the word Anima? Well, it might be a good idea to look into its etymology and see what it reveals. The word anima derives from the root Latin, with earlier derivations reaching into the ancient Greek for animos. Interestingly, both of these words correspond to a special association between the air or wind, with a unique form of breath that represents the vitalizing principle within someone's life. This metaphorical equivalency of the wind and the breath with an interior dynamic is remarkably adequate in translating the essentials of our subject. For when we breathe, we become conscious of our life force. A strong airflow delivers the affirmation that one is alive and spirited, whereas weak breathing indicates a loss of vigor and a lack of energy to meet life's demands. So the quality of our breathing points us to other aspects of our action needed to make life livable. It is of little wonder then why meditation practitioners have placed so much emphasis on correcting the breathing process, for to effect it through persistent conditioning gives us direct access to our own nervous physiology, producing effects which can translate into benefits at both our bodily and psychic levels. The comparison between our breath and the wind is obvious at the sensory level. However, our breath is indeed a special kind of wind because, unlike the minute workings of our neural networks or the passage of our blood flow, the direct contact to its rhythmic process grounds us to the sensation of being alive. Breathing and life force also take on modern expressions such as to take one's breath away. When we are confronted by something or someone who is so remarkable to us, we experience something akin to a soft paralysis. Our consciousness becomes narrow and unites with the subject, making it, for a short time at least, the central item of our world. Indeed, it becomes the figure of our world's image. So this picture that we're getting of an energetic system charged with vitality is very close to the anima concept. No matter where it is discovered, it always projects itself onto that which activates us the most. People are glamoured by it, transforming them from ordinary people into targets of fascination. For centuries, women have made an art out of appealing to men through this way. For when a man is being seduced, she is not really talking to him, but him and his anima. Likewise, inanimate objects can be given over to wonder by becoming targets of its projection, and as such, all advertisers and marketers of products appeal directly to our animas when presenting us with their latest wares. Despite the myriad of ways that the archetype can be projected, we also have to remember that the same force that festoons our lives with romance and inspires states that set the foundation for the flourishing of man's genius are derived from the same psychological ingredients that can send him hurtling into all families of flirtations, moods, and lagoons of private despair. The anima may reflect one of the most essential patterns in the entire psyche. For like all archetypes, it gives a framework for the psyche's forms. But the anima, more than any other, has come to embody the life principle of the mind's activity. Due to the fact that archetypes become projected onto subjects that reflect their patterns, the anima reveals itself through subjects which inspire and activate us the most. And for a man's mind, there's ever been one image that can complement this. Every man who has ever been in love never forgets the effect it has over him. Not only does the connection with another soul unite us with forces that lay dormant within ourselves, the sense of obliteration one receives from its collapse scorches our life's ecosystem like some great volcano, for the price of invoking such passions always contains a destructive element. And with each subsequent romance that transpires, it leaves behind the impact craters of its influence, shaping how he interprets womankind in general and the life systems that support him. Jung claimed that we cannot properly understand the psyche unless we include the world in our assessments, since the psyche is in a constant interaction with it, and like two parties in a relationship, one has been shaped by the other's influence. Culture forms are the most sensitive to psychological projection because they contain the images, sounds, and narratives that have been mandated by archetypal patterns, and as such reflect back the essential ingredients that relate to their origin in the mind. The culture motif that is key to understanding the anima is in the pair of opposites called the syzygy. The word syzygy can be traced back to the Greek syzygos, which means to be unionized or yoked together. From this word arises the zygote in biology, which emerges from the union of two gamete cells. Now, considering what we've said about its psychological character, it's easy to understand why Jung would associate this motif with the anima. The conscious and the unconscious are yoked together, with the anima representing the portrait of this union, whilst also acting as an intermediary between them. The union of the opposites is one of the most recurring themes in mythology. To appreciate the prevalence of this motif across so many human cultures spanning over centuries of time is to say something of the mind itself. For as we have said many times on here, the frequency of occurrence of these motifs in culture media, myth, and in psychiatric records cannot simply be waved away as some fluke of happen chance or cross-cultural exchange. It speaks to something much more essential within the life of the organism that carries these motifs over into the world. What we are dealing with here are organizing patterns in the mind of the creature itself, which clothe themselves in associative jackets that complement their dynamic and are bonded by familiar association in the mind. This uniting principle between two spaces, two territories, or two people is the home of the archetype. If we think back to the myriad of fantastic narratives that have touched our lives, there we see over and over again the dissociated realm that has to be brought together by a hero into a whole, and whose personal restoration is discovered in the union with another soul who he encounters on his journey. This remarkable other is always surrounded by the glamours of fascination and intrigue, but she also signals a great danger that threatens to tear the hero away from his former self and the world of his familiar attachments. This is the world of youthful idylls that we all yearn to return to now and again, and this is precisely the old world that has to die so that it can be reborn within itself, as a zygote, as a union of the opposites, becoming whole. The zygote kingdom of mythology is the symbolic representation of a mature psychological system, one that represents the outcome of a synergy between those forces within the psyche that inspire the forms to life, and the creative agency within mankind that drags them from wishful vapours into confident realizations. And it is this remarkable other that shows the imperfect individual the image of that potential, not only of the realm, but of his own part in its transformation. Just as the artist ruminates upon impressions of his future surrounded by works that have not yet been made, or the expectant father imagines his offspring as a grown being interacting in the same life currents as he finds himself, these impressions emanate from the same source in the mind, inspiring us with the images of potential outcomes so that we can act to manufacture their emergence in time. Perhaps at the deepest level, the anima could be seen as a representation of the impetus within living systems to seek synergy with others, so that they can convert themselves, just like archetypes, into new bodies. An archetype that bridges the pairs of opposites, the image of the incarnating life. It's difficult, nigh on impossible for human beings to talk about such things without inserting their desires for positive outcomes. We can feel not only comfortable in that we're starting to understand a concept, yet even more so when we convert it to some pleasant destination like being more mentally secure, confident, and successful. However, when we're talking about psychological phenomena, we alienate ourselves from their true dynamism and consequence if we only consider them in ways that seem beneficial to us. The psyche does not manufacture its forms to appease us. We are more subject to them than they are to us, and we intuitively understand that the nature of their expression mandates the ambience of our inner lives. For an archetype that presents itself within the imagery and language of inspired forms, and of parts becoming wholes, it would seem like we've found the likely suitor for our optimism. But as the old saying goes, there are always two sides to every story. There has been some confusion when it comes to qualifying what Jung means by feminine and masculine parts of the psyche. To clear up this confusion, all we have to know is that he was talking symbolically. There is not literally some hidden woman in a man's mind waiting to be discovered, nor is there a corresponding dilemma in a female's mind. Rather, there are flavours of the psyche's expression that we could symbolically pair off to masculine and feminine guises. For example, aggression is masculine, empathy is feminine, or logic is masculine and emotionality is feminine, to cite another example. Such descriptive styles of reference can be useful in matters of self-knowledge, but only when we understand that they are symbolic and not literal descriptions of the phenomena in question. Returning then to the matter at hand, how does this pertain to the archetypes, specifically the anima? Well, without going into laborious detail, it will suffice to say that the quality of these psychic expressions can be reflective of the relationship that we have with the psyche in general. Many factors can influence the quality of one's mental health, though as a general rule, the more or less conscientious we are about our minds and how we translate that into our ideas, thoughts, and actions, the more or less likely we are to experience a cordial dynamic in what comes to us in life, which corresponds to how secure we feel on the inside and how we respond to others. However, most of us are not conditioned to think this way. Most of us don't practice introspective techniques like meditation. We don't invoke mindfulness unless we've gone through some kind of therapy. And most of us don't even have a working framework of reference to understand our inner life at all. We also exist in a culture that provides us with no positive system of guiding imagery that would help us in this task. Instead, we have a legion of manipulative narratives, full of false priests now called experts, that seek to unite us to some external system or other, making us the drones for their expansion. Without a positive mythology to guide us into maturity, this makes us more vulnerable to suggestion, both from within and without. Under such conditions of fragility, we are more likely to be given over to what Jung called psychological possession, which is to say, where our conscious faculties are influenced by some agency that is unknown to us. You may have witnessed this in yourself or in those around you. Upon instigation by some new comment or discovery, his whole posture and reflexivity towards life changes. His language becomes more defensive, aggressive perhaps, until the passage of whatever provoked his agitation is assuaged. In that moment he was not completely of himself. He was being motivated by something which sprung upon him from the inside like a puma in the bushes, something which unconsciously reminded him of another something which he experienced in life, and which has left its mark on him. There are always characters in fantastic narratives that have been marked by life and perhaps had their innocence stolen. These experiences leave powerful impressions upon the developing mind, which, left to ruminate, can transform a life's direction into a wandering bed of secrets, regrets, and unresolved dilemmas. The agents of the unconscious chatter into his ear like demons, who never cease to remind him of the image which inspires his pain the most. I want us to now look at this small scene from the movie Legend and really listen to the language that he uses in this scene, because I think that it complements these things in the Anima very well.
Mother Night, fold your dark arms about me. Protect me in your black embrace. I sit alone, an impotent exile, whilst this force, this presence, returns to torment me.
Now, that scene was wonderful for a number of reasons. Not only was it brilliantly delivered by the actor Tim Curry, it also conveys some very, very strong associations to the Anima. Tim Curry's character, who is simply called Darkness in the film, is first seen in a brooding mood. Moods are emblematic of unconscious contents rising up to meet ego consciousness, which they fumigate with the incenses of forgotten memories and parts of ourselves that have fallen into neglect. John Stanford is a Jungian analyst who wrote a book called The Invisible Partners, which is specifically about the Anima and the Animus, and he has this to say on the Anima's influence. In the case of the Anima, it is she who lies behind a man's moods. When a man is possessed by the Anima, he is drawn into a dark mood and tends to become sulky, oversensitive, and withdrawn. A poisonous atmosphere surrounds him, and it is as though he is immersed in a kind of psychological fog. He ceases to be objective or related, and his masculine stance is eroded by peevishness. A man in the grip of the Anima acts for all the world like an inferior kind of woman who is upset about something, and that, in fact, is exactly what he has within himself. Now let's also consider the language that was used in that scene that we just watched. The Prince of Darkness calls out to an invisible force, which he describes in three ways. One being a personification of the night. Secondly, the night is gendered as female. And thirdly, that the night is his mother. He speaks out aloud to night from a position of vulnerability like a child, and pleads to be taken into its embrace, which represents for him a kind of sanctuary where he can escape something about the mood that is troubling him. He then goes on to refer to himself in three ways. One, that he is alone. Second, that he is impotent. And lastly, that he is an exile. This choice of words is very interesting because obviously he isn't alone in the sense that he's surrounded by all of these other beings performing their duties, and he's not alone in the sense that he is in the company of this mood that surrounds him, but something about the mood makes him feel alienated from himself, which is why he says he's alone. His impotence derives from being cut off or exiled from this familiar field of power as a ruler and a manager of other souls. And it is the seed planted inside the mood that is the source of this impotence. But because he cannot access it, he cannot control it, and so the powerful becomes powerless under the influence of something which has power over him. A presence, as he calls it, that continues to torment him. Now, This resonates strongly to the anima in several ways, and this is why I love fantasy, because it's so ripe with this kind of stuff. The source of the dark mood and the feminine night which he calls out to deliver him from it are actually the same thing. They flow from the same source in his psyche that he derives both his sense of security from and his sense of alienated torment. The anima is the night because she represents the liminal force that stands between him and his unconscious, a force which he imbues with all sorts of symbolically feminine traits, and from where he derives the image of his salvation. He sees in the night what the hero creates with the aid of his anima in the zygote, which is his wholeness, and he communicates this in his choice of language when he requests his anima to envelop him completely in a dark embrace. This desire symbolizes the wholeness of the zygote wanting to manifest inside of him, but because he is a fallen character, which in real life terms is to say he has a somewhat dysfunctional personality, he has difficulties in utilizing the full range of his creative agency, which he could call upon to make himself whole, and therefore experiences this as a sense of impotence. This creates a constant sense of self-doubt and unfulfillment within his mind, which he believes can only be assuaged by appealing to a higher power. Associated with this is a strong feeling of alienation from his own psychic contents, which again, the language is telling. He describes almost like an intruder in his thoughts, which he doesn't want to be there. This is indicative that these are parts of himself that have been split off from ego consciousness, and therefore represent to the conscious mind something that is foreign and doesn't belong to his own identity. But the unconscious is relentless in its remanufacturing of personal contents, which it continually sends up to conscious shores. Here these are the vague moods which represent these old parts of himself that need to be reassimilated so that his psyche can experience wholeness. The anima within this character is strongly felt, and it's obvious that he has some direct line of contact to it, but those areas of his life that have fallen into neglect will not go away, and it is the very same power he asks to deliver him into wholeness that also torments him from the inside with those lingering parts of himself that need to become conscious again. In essence, his anima is calling to him from within, whilst he is calling to it from without. In dysfunctional types, and even in not so dysfunctional types as well, the anima is received like some dark messenger, charged with all sorts of feminine enigmas and mysterious power. The function of the anima is still conducive to the psyche's impetus to heal itself, but because the conscious mind has such an ambivalent stance towards unconscious contents, it often gets interpreted as something dark, as something both mysterious and dangerous at the same time, and this is what causes a lot of the problems. The anima in such individuals is still fully active, and perhaps we could say that such characters are closer to it due to the fact that their instability draws them closer to the unconscious. Because when people start to unravel, they hear the unconscious louder. Some try to run from it. Others go mad from proximity. Others still become the agents of their own tragedy, which is simply to say, they become psychologically enslaved to that which has them. This can bring along with it experiences of tremendous power. People who have been given over to nervous distress usually become hypersensitive, and under such possessive relations with the anima, often experience surges in performance which they translate as a sign that they are more capable than before the events which changed them. This past life, which they now charge with accusations of weakness, contains important memories that could facilitate the healing process, but now become interpreted as a mark of inferiority and is rejected into the unconscious.
I've accepted the truth that you were once Anakin Skywalker, my father.
That name no longer has any meaning for me.
It is the name of your true self you've only forgotten. I know there is good in you. The Emperor hasn't driven it from you fully.
Obi-Wan once thought as you do. You don't know the power of the dark side.
Suit your feelings, Father. You can't do this. I feel the conflict within you. Let go of your hate.
It is too late for me, son.
These delusions of grandeur are but compensatory band-aids for the wounds still left open, and whatever powers might be derived from an overly active anima invading the consciousness, the effects of these wounds bleed the dark hero out in time, meaning he is left in a perpetual state of mania and exhaustion. We often see male characters under the influence of the anima take on the mantle of some great mission to restore order back to the world, which represents a suppressed desire to mend the disorder within themselves. It is always society and everyone else in it which must be changed into a new configuration which mitigates the pain of the dark hero of being disunited from themselves. Never is that transformation seen symbolically for what it is, a projection of the healing process, mistranslated through a dysfunctional psychology. Associated to this mission, we also notice a reversal of the heroic endeavour which always stems from the inside out. Instead, these darker characters always seek salvation from some external source, some super technology, a force like Mother Night, or becoming pawns in some wicked sorcerer's game, whose own strength of personality acts as a psychological magnet which holds the dark hero's fragility together. We see this often in life, where a lone narcissist will surround themselves with a pack of minions, typically weaker, impressionable types, which he can use as a source of narcissistic supply to power the engine of his false self. This is complemented in fantasy stories where the sorcerer genius commands his lieutenants to construct a monstrous industrial artifice which represents a symbol to his grandiosity and perversion. The dark hero does this for his master because he is now an automaton for the forces both within and without. Forces which he now uses to do his master's bidding are the same which his master has used to convert him from man into machine, from individual to instrument. The tragedy of the dark hero who has fallen under possession by his anima is a reminder of what befalls us if we lose connection with our inspired image that allows us to heal and become whole, and where we will typically sacrifice our individuality to another person or system which represents a surrogate of that process. Also, their vulnerability is a reflection of our vulnerability. Without some sense of inner locus, we are left like open wounds to the sorcerers of the world, who are only too eager to offer their false narratives to make up for the structural guidance that we're looking for. These narratives tap into springs of unconscious memory, and this is how they command a psychological effect over us. Often these are things which reflect memories of rejection or dissatisfaction with oneself, and upon experiencing this, the psyche's archetypes charge into the narrative and establish it as a new personal mythology, where we can see ourselves as the central figures in some grand vision to reshape society and restore order back to a world that wounded us long ago. But a broken world can never be saved by the broken. Only an individual restoration with those prime memories that have shaped us in their image can show us the solutions to heal ourselves. That which we call the archetypes are always associated with those memories, and they inspire them to life within the mind just as we are inspired to act in life by their expression. These segments on culture forms are essential to understanding archetypal patterns because culture is replete with examples of what becomes those who willingly utilize or unconsciously submit to their influence. It is in these culture stories that we can see both sides of that power. A power which can unite a life together is the same force that can tear it to pieces, splitting the individual off from the source of his potential for wholeness and transforming his wounds into a weapon which he readies against all in the world who reflect back the image of his central tragedy. Right then, there we have it. This has been my video on the Anima archetype. It's been a pleasure to make this one. This has probably been my favorite archetype video to make, due to just the nature of the archetype itself, and also spending a lot of time talking about those culture forms and how it shows itself up in these fantastic images. I really enjoyed making that part of it. Though I will admit this video actually went on for a bit longer than I originally anticipated, and there were going to be some things that I was going to include in this video, which I am instead going to import over to the follow-up video that I'm going to do on this, because remember, this is a two-parter. So yeah, some of the things that I was going to say in this video concerning the archetype, I'm actually going to reserve for the follow-up video on the female animus. So that'll be an interesting thing to talk about. Not only some different variations of, excuse me, how that archetype reveals itself within female psychology and also within female culture forms. I might do a segment on that as well. Though I also want to talk about giving people some simple techniques that they can import into their own life, where they can see how these patterns reflect in the way that they interact with other people. Say, if you're a man, how you view other women, and if you're a female, in how it shows up in the way that you people look at men. So I think that that'll be an interesting thing to talk about. Though I just want to conclude this one here because I realize that this has already been quite a long video, and I want to get straight to work making the next one to conclude it. So yeah, thanks very much for watching this video on the Anima, and I'll see you again in the next one for the Animus.